Okay, so
Where did I stop?
you just stopped at the Turkish envoy was shooting with the British, and he said, "Look, I'm not the real guy. The Sultan can really do it a lot better than me." And you said it wasn't confirmed in terms of the actual distance, 900 and something yards.
972 yards. There's always been a controversy of how it was measured, how to convert it. It was measured in get, and how it would be converted to the system that's used both in the UK and in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they settled on 972 yards, and that became the distance that everybody aspired to.
Right.
Now, Harry Drake, he was in contact with a number of other archers, Paul Klopsteg and other, is that a real yardage? Bruce Odell, with a handheld bow, shot over 1,000 yards. And then they said, the record is gotten. But the bow that Bruce Odell used was, yep, do you want to bring up the bow? Was a bit of a tricky bow. It's not exactly this style, but it has a keyhole.
Right.
So center shot.
Yeah.
This one has much more of an extended overdraw. Bruce's bow didn't have quite the extended overdraw, and the extended grip was not quite as far out. This is a horizontal grip, a boxing grip.
Yeah.
But they eventually moved to this kind of very high-tech, very tricky bow. The profile of the bow itself is very much like a Turkish flight bow.
Right. But I guess it looks like a glorified siper that they would use in Turkey.
Yes, exactly. And the inspiration is indeed the siper.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Right. So they broke
an older generation also.
They broke the distance with this bow, you said.
The distance with this bow, it is held by Don Brown, and off the top of my head, I'm going to say about 1,300 shot of Harry Drake with a foot bow at 2,028 yards as a foot bow. He did that in 1971.
Wow.
And then with a crossbow, it's something like 2,043 yards.
Right.
Harry Drake himself using a 55-pound bow, a 25-kilo bow, a bow like the one that Jaap was holding up. He was up in his 70s then, or maybe 80s. It was 1986, so he was about 72. Shooting a 55-pound bow, 55.1-pound bow, he did 1,000 yards. And that was one of the challenges that he had. Now, Harry, at the end of his life, tried very hard to reproduce a Turkish flight bow. Mm-hmm. And this is the one experiment, the one challenge that Harry never met. He's devoted 3 years of his life, which was actually 5 years, which was actually a lot longer, to try to do it. And one of the mistakes Harry made was he tried to reproduce a bow. And in the end, he abandoned the project of trying to copy someone else's work and went back to his own instincts. And that the bow that was shot at the time was shot by Don Brown. It was a horn composite bow, not shot with the thumb ring, not shot with the zipper, but it held the record up until this year, or 2019, when Ivar Mald broke the record at about 80 centimeters. He broke the record. From 1996 up to this last year. Now, the flight competition, the annual competition at present takes place in the Bonneville Salt Flats. Previously, there were 3 sites. There was Ivanpah, which was a dry lake bed, fossil lake bed near Las Vegas, and then another fossil lake bed, a playa, which is in the central part of Nevada, Smith Creek, and it's at a slightly higher elevation. So the air is a little bit thinner, and it's quite a beautiful, spectacularly beautiful place. The Bonneville Salt Flats are also very beautiful, but over the past 20 years, we have noticed how the environment there is undergoing a lot of degradation compared to what it was 20 years ago. This year, the competition has been, it's under discussion, but it has been scheduled, and it will take place around the Labor Day weekend. Jaap and I were both not in favor of holding it, but other members of the flight committee felt that they wanted to go ahead with it.
Sure. So
the kind of, let me wrap up one other comment about the bows. The kind of bows that are recognized by the U.S. Flight Archery include every possible range from compound bows to foot bows, to self bows, to complex composite bows, to target bows, to recurve bows, to field bows, you name it. Not all of these are recognized by World Archery, the international organization, but the records that are set, that are recognized by USA Archery, are considered to be world distance records, and we keep them recorded.
So pretty much anything with two limbs and that can project an arrow is considered in the flight archery.
Yes.
In their own class.
In their own class,
right.
Yes, except there are very clear specifications. And I would recommend anybody interested go to usflightarchery.com, and we have our different categories of bows, as well as there are fairly peculiar things. If it's an English longbow, it has to conform to the shape of an English longbow. There are length specifications, and there's also specifications on the kind of arrow, the type of fletching in some cases, as well as the kind of release. No mechanical releases are allowed. Everything has to be a release that is not mechanized, because the interest that we have is, what can the human capacity do by way of design, technology, and performance?
Yeah, yeah.
As for myself, in my later years, I'm slowly trying to specialize in flight shooting. I need more time, but that's my last challenge. You know, making a flight bow would actually be at par. You know, of course, we always hope we can shoot and pass our teachers. You know, our mentors, but that's the challenge. So the challenge to build a modern flight bow is phenomenally difficult.
Yeah.
Of course, now, since the hornbow is on a big comeback, this little hornbow some years ago, you know, I did okay, but then nobody came with hornbows. But this year, like Ivar Malk from Norway,
yeah,
he came, set a very good record. It's not close to the Turks yet, but we're getting there. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. And again, he makes this. This is his arrow. This nice needle arrow.
Right.
Also, I'm experimenting with arrows on. I make little pie shape out of bamboo.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes I make a layer of wood, then a layer of bamboo, then a layer of extreme hardwood. Cut it into a small pie. Glue 6 pieces of those pies together, make it round, and then I start shaping an arrow out. Now this arrow is way too big for flight, but that's for experimenting and see how they shoot.
Right.
The arrow is always a challenge too, and you know, it's magical. It's magical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have a regular arrow? Let me get a regular arrow. Hold that for a second.
Kay's getting a regular arrows to see
the
difference between a flight arrow with with this kind of bows.
Yeah.
And
okay, I'm gonna just get this one.
Yeah.
Now, presumably, some of these the flight arrows, you know, they're kind of very thin, needle-like, but they can still withstand. Obviously that long distance being shot and the power coming into the arrow. I mean, yeah, like you say, that's where the craftsmanship comes in, isn't it?
Sectional density, the sustained velocity. So the arrow has to have enough mass, enough to, when the energy is converted from the bow and then pushes the arrow, there has to be sufficient mass to carry the energy. If it's too light, it just,
the wind just stops
it just wobbles and is lost. So the principle, and this is Harry Drake's principle, sectional density is sustained velocity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's magic.
You'll have to give me a bit of time to get my head around that, but I'm sure it makes sense. Now, on a practical basis, if someone goes along to the flight archery shoot, you know, at a normal archery competition, you know, the targets are maybe 30 yards, 50, 60 yards or something. You know, you have to go back and forth and collect. Obviously, with such a long distance, how does it work out, and how long is the day, and how many rounds do they get? Because presumably they have to go and collect the arrows and stuff. How does that work?
There's 2 rounds per day. So
just 2. All right.
Only 2.
Only 2. And each round you shoot 6 arrows. So, and 1 year, Larry Hadfield drove 1,400 miles to shoot 1 arrow. He shot 1. So what happens is the archers stand, we have the shooting line, and they have to stand where their toes do not transgress that shooting line. They have to be just behind the shooting line. Okay. They're shooting at a right angle, like 90 degrees.
Okay.
So if they're deviating left or right, you're actually forfeiting distance.
Right,
Once
of course.
every archer has shot the number of arrows he or she is willing to shoot, no more than 6. Some shoot less than 6. Once it's shot, then the field crew heads out, and the arrows are out in the field, and it can take a good hour, maybe longer or more. And we use the total station, the surveyor's equipment. So there'll be somebody with the that little apparatus, dial light, whatever it's called, prism, and then they'll hold it up, and then the
and we have 2-way radio.
The base camp will register the prism, the light, and then we record. And we keep 1 copy out in the field, and then 1 copy is recorded at the base camp. Right. And so the field crew, it's usually 3 people who are doing the work of arrow retrieval. We start with the longest arrow shot, and then we start moving in. And if there's a question, let's say 2 arrows, look from the same archer, look, well, you know, which one is longer? We will always measure both, and sometimes 3. And then we move in. And anybody who's out in the field, they're under strict advisement. Do not pull an arrow until we identify who. We have to read the name, and then the arrows are coded, usually some sort of numbering system, so that the arrows are registered to the archer. We know their name, and we know that, okay, this is arrow 6199, shot by Ivar Mold or somebody. And then we call that in. And when we finish clearing the field, we must account for every arrow that's shot.
Do the arrows always land kind of straight in, or do some of them skit along the ground at any point, or have any of them shattered on you know, hitting the ground? Or
you would like to have it on an angle like this, you know. If it goes in like this, that means the energy was completely dissipated before the arrow could use it all up.
Yes.
And of course it depends on the wind. You know, we shoot always with the wind from the back.
We try.
Right. But high up there might be counter wind.
Yes.
It's very, very tricky. And so the wind sometimes can catch it. And of course, there's no rocks there, but if the arrow comes down, might lay flat. Now the tiny needles, those, I call them needles, those are out of carbon, with the modern bows.
Right.
They can sink in all the way to the flats.
Wow, really?
And that'd be very hard to see, extremely hard to discover where they are.
On the salt flats in Bonneville by the Utah-Nevada border, where we shoot, The difficulty is that the ground is sometimes soft. And so the difficulty is actually finding an arrow. We had somebody from the UK, Tony Banks from the UK, a couple of years ago. He was shooting a, I believe, target compound. We found a couple of his arrows, and we knew that there were some out there somewhere.
Right.
And quite often, we'll be out 1 year and we'll find an arrow from a previous year.
Really?
We just didn't find.
Right.
So the real challenge is on the salt flats. The challenge is that if it's a really great shot, heavy poundage bow, great shot, it can go too deep. We may not be able to find it. On distance, and any little deviation left or right gives us a wide range.
Over a mile.
When we're out there. And at Smith Creek,
that's our second range we have.
In Nevada, the challenge is the ground is very hard. And so it's very difficult for the wooden arrows that are required, wood or bamboo, that are required in the primitive categories. Those arrows do shatter.
Do you? I mean,
So
I guess,
you know,
yeah.
Range,
If an arrow, if a wooden arrow shatters, you can't really record it, or sometimes just the front end is in the ground and the rest of it is broken off.
Well, yeah, but whatever sticks out, we record it. But the archer lost his arrow, and some of those arrows, you know, days and days and days of working in the arrow. So
I can imagine.
You really don't want to lose them.
But it's very ironical that for such a, I guess, old tradition, some people are using composite bows, wooden arrows. You have to have very high-tech equipment to actually measure the distance correctly, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. But you know, it's critical. The measurement has to
absolutely.
Has to be precise.
Yeah. No, for sure. Roughly, how many people attend them each year?
Last year was usually around 20.
I know about 30. Typically about 30. And last year it was about 50.
Yeah, last year was 50. And then the time really expands in measuring, you know, to get your arrows. That's why there are only 2 rounds a day. And we better start at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And going back to measuring, one year, who was it? James Martin and Joseph Monis.
Yeah.
And the difference was what, a half an inch?
Yeah.
Oh,
a couple of centimeters.
A couple of centimeters
difference.
Very close.
That's how precise we measure.
That's good. That's good. So certainly the flight archery in the US is one of the most well-known flight archery competitions. Where else worldwide is this tradition still done?
Well, Turkey's in a big comeback. The Conquest Cup. China is been interested in holding it, you know.
Poland has.
Poland, yeah.
The UK has had it for years.
Really?
And it's usually, UK is usually around August.
Okay.
A couple of weeks before the
Japan still has flight shooting. Always have historically.
Yeah.
At various archery gatherings, flight archery has become more and more popular. The real tricky thing is having a sufficient range. Because
of course,
when you're shooting over 1,000 yards, you know, you need.
Could be no car in the way, or a house.
Yeah, and I guess it's not really a spectator sport, is it? Because I mean, once the arrow's gone, I mean, it's hard to see, and you can't really see where it lands. So there's a lot of waiting around and things. So I guess it's just the archers are mainly there, and maybe their partners or people that are helping them.
Yeah. Usually what happens is it becomes a couple of days where folks spend a lot of time swapping stories and sharing a lot of information. History. There's a lot of old timers who come. Bait has always come from Australia since maybe 1999, maybe before.
Wow, great. Yeah.
He's come over from Australia. Often there's folks from the UK. So there's a lot of, and there's several generations of flight archers. There are people who shot with Harry Drake. And then there are people who've come for the first time. And so there's a lot of like information, a lot of technology. There's people who at the last minute brought a bow and they thought it was going to clock in at 50 pounds, and guess what, it's too heavy. And so they're running around either, if it's a south bow, they're, because it's very arid, so it tightens up. And so they're really scraping their bows, or they're making bowstrings, or they're working with the arrows. And there's also a lot of support that's given, where somebody comes and we look at those arrows and we say, man, you're not going to do well here. Here, let me lend you some arrows. Use these instead.
Right. Especially when new people come, the arrows, the fletches, they use the regular commercial fletches, So that's right away they learn, okay, that's not going to work, and we'll lend stuff out,
Yeah. So it sounds like a very nice networking community there. People are there very supportive and helping each other rather than an extremely competitive atmosphere.
Oh yeah.
It's an interesting competitive atmosphere with a lot of cooperation.
Yeah.
There was an article I wrote a couple of years ago. It was maybe 2015, 2016. And it was the entire flight shoot. Everybody was shooting each other's equipment and helping each other out. And I think I titled the article, Where Competition Begets Cooperation.
Lovely. Yeah, that's right. It's nice when you have that camaraderie there. How you mentioned something about the weather. How does the weather, the aridity or humidity affect some of the bows? I'm sure some of the composite bows that you have a tough time.
It's extremely dry. Extremely dry in Utah. The humidity is very, very low, and very hot. It's a desert, and so all the bows, especially natural bows, will stiffen up. But even bows with fiberglass backings, facings, they'll stiffen up by several pounds. So if you make your equipment, be aware of that. And then you can have, like in minutes, you can have a windstorm with 60-mile winds. It blows everything apart. So it's from one extreme to another. And one year it was like 90 degrees, hot. Next day was snow in the mountains there. There was snow in the mountains, and it was almost freezing cold. So it can change overnight, just like that.
Wow.
For our field office, we ended up buying a tent, which is a military-grade tent used in Kosovo, that will withstand, I think it's a EF2 tornado.
Yeah.
We've had instances where even a yurt has been blown down by the gusts of wind.
Very strong.
It can go like that, and then suddenly it's like heavy equipment is being knocked over.
Wow, amazing. Now, presumably, during the rest of the year, that area, that land is not used for anything else. It's just used for that flight shoot every year, because there could be arrows still stuck in the ground and things like that.
The land is used. So the Bonneville Salt Flats are where the land races. So land speed races.
Right.
Speedway, automobiles were tested there. They have Speed Week there. Plus, you see a lot of the what do you call it? Those land sailing.
Oh, sailing,
sailing.
Yes.
Sailing. In fact, one year we were out trying to measure, and a guy comes by on a boat. It's like somebody had to get on the ATV and get out there and get them moved. There may be four-wheelers that are out, not necessarily where we are. We secure a permit that is 4 square miles.
Yeah.
So we have a real good permit. But the land is recreation. It's BLM land, so Bureau of Land Management. So it's public lands.
Right.
And so there's all kinds of activities that can take place out there.
Yeah. But I mean, the flight archery is an established annual meeting. So yes. I mean, the how would you say, the local council or the government, I mean, they are aware that it happens every year, and they've cordoned that area off for you.
Well, yeah, we get permits every year. We get the permit and usually at the same time. We get the infrastructure called in. Yeah. We make the hospital aware, that we're out there and things like that, just in case something happens. Yeah, it's, you know,
Excellent.
usually the state police is aware of it.
And
What happens is when you're
Yes.
leaving, when you're driving west from Salt Lake City, the land is spectacular. And as you get about 60 miles out of Salt Lake City, you're in perfectly flat land because it is the fossil lake bed. And the land glistens because of the salt that's there.
Yeah.
There is no natural shade. There is no
nothing.
Human shade, man-made shade.
Yes,
It
yes.
is nothing out there. There's maybe some of these little salt bushes that grow here and there, but it is endless space. And in some ways, in many ways, it is very beautiful, but it can also be very forbidding land. When there was the push to head west as the Euro-Americans were making certain migrations heading off to either California or Oregon. There were some like disasters that happened out in the Salt Flats. The Donner Party got bogged down there and they ended up in the High Sierra overwintering with terrible results. So it is very forbidding land.
It's brutal.
It's beautiful,
Yes.
but it's also forbidding.
Yeah.
The closest town,
It's like the Arctic.
yeah, the closest town is a little border town on the border between Utah and Nevada. Nevada is where gambling is legal,
Right.
and the Utah side has motels as well as on the Nevada side. And it's like a little town, Wendover and West Wendover, that thrives on the tourism, salt flats, adventure vacations, and certainly the casinos.
Right, right, beautiful. Yeah, I can imagine it's probably, you know, it's as if you're not really on planet Earth. It's a totally different landscape there, which like you say, can be very beautiful, but very harsh at the same time. What is the role that you guys have, particularly in the Flight Archery? Are you part of the organization, or do you have any particular role in the competition?
Yes, we're part of the committee, part of the organization, and you know, Kay she takes care of the financial books and all that stuff,
right?
And planning. And usually Kay and I stay overnight. We're the only ones who stay overnight there to keep an eye on all the equipment, because total stations are there, the ATVs there, the big field office there, computers are there. So somebody has to keep an eye on that. So
right. So you guys are the oil in the machine, I guess.
Yeah, we're the oil of the machine. Yeah.
The person who was the chairman of the Flight Archery Committee, Ike Hancock, ran it from about 1973 up till about 2012 or so. And like he was quite extraordinary in all of the details that he took care of. Towards the end of his life, we had to step in to help out because it got a little bit too much for him to manage. And then we effected a transition from Ike's leadership to other leadership. At present, the current chair of the committee is Alan Case, and but we've been the individuals who often make sure that things are in order every year for the annual competition. Get the field office set up and get registrations done and so on and so on. So as if you guys weren't busy enough doing that, you also established the Fort Dodge horse archery competition, which was of around 1999. Tell us a little bit about that and how that has developed up to today.
The horseback archery. Well, it all started with a little pipe dream. Well, it was not a pipe dream anymore, but anyway, you know, from day one when I started making bows, and I go to clubs, and I always wanted to bring archery out of the sandbox, you know, to the next level. Yeah. And I thought one way, I said, why don't we start doing? Well, we had Asiatic. We tried slowly with baby steps with Lucas and David Gray and us, Thomas. They would go to Denton Hill. We start doing an Asiatic archery clinic. So we had horn bows, the Koreans, and Lucas and me, and the Japanese bows. So then they said, well, why not organize a festival? We have different traditions coming together. Right. And not only that in archery, but bring it to a higher level, have lectures, either historical lectures or lectures about equipment,
Excellent.
things like that. And
Yeah.
that we did quite well, run quite well with people from like I say, from Bhutan.
Yes, our vision was we wanted to create a space where people from different backgrounds, living traditions, and people who were interested could come to face-to-face encounters with each other, share knowledge, swap information. And we were very fortunate to have a very good contact in Fort Dodge, Iowa, because Meg Beshi, very good organizer, a great grant writer, a mover and shaker. Fort Dodge allowed us a site where there was a fairground and we could get insurance because they do rodeos. So they weren't really too concerned about horseback archery. Other sites, it's like, oh my God, you know, you're doing what with a horse and what with a weapon.
We get that a lot in the UK. Yeah.
For sure.
And you know the drift. So Meg was the person who helped bring about, like, build that infrastructure. What we had a vision was, let us find people who know their tradition, who live their tradition. So we had friends out with the Cherokee Nation we talked about the other day, and we asked them, will you please come up and bring your cornstalk shoot? Friends on the Lakota Reservation, Mike One Star, can you please come? Please come give a talk. Our Japanese sensei, will you please come? We looked around with our contacts to find people where, okay, they know their tradition, they're willing to share. We wanted it as a gathering where there would be demonstrations, talks, workshops, horseback archery training, competition, and we wanted to create this large, almost a happening.
Yeah.
And we did.
And we did. I don't know how we did it. I look now at the program, and what did we do now? Unbelievable. And basically, there was the forerunner of all the happenings.
Here's a program, and this is like the schedule of events that we have. It's hard to see, but
it's a little bit hard to see. But yeah, if you bring it up, okay, I can see it there. Yeah. So I'm sure it's jam-packed. I mean, that to organize just, you know, we've done a couple of things here in the UK with just, you know, one instructor, a 2-day clinic or something like that. But what you guys have done, I mean, has to be commended. It's logistically a nightmare and a headache. I'm sure you went through a lot of trouble with that. But when it does happen and everyone comes together, it's just an amazing hot pot of knowledge and networking and, you know, camaraderie and brotherhood. I mean, it's an amazing event.
And we had very, very good goodwill from, like, Stephen Selby out of Hong Kong. Like, he came, and he has wonderful connections in Asia. So the first year he was able to effect the travel to bring 3 Mongolians. Oh, amazing. And it was, and the language that they had to speak, the only shared language the Mongolians and Stephen had was Russian. That was the language.
Wow, really?
Now Stephen knows, you know, how many languages. He could go click, click, click from one language to another.
Amazing.
So Stephen, you know, was willing to contribute by pulling in the contacts that we had. The final year that we were involved, that we did it, we brought a woman in from Sudan. She was actually somebody I knew in Canada, and I was having lunch with her, Cecilia Imunu. And over lunch, we were talking, and she started describing the traditional archery practices in Sudan. And I said, Cecilia, guess what? You're going to come to Fort Dodge this year. And so we were very happy because we had brought together the continents. And we completed the circle. We were very, very pleased. But we brought in somebody from Bhutan, Sewang Nidap from Bhutan one year. We always had folks from the native nations in America, English folks, and just I would probably, if I started naming everybody off, I'd leave somebody out. So that's we say, just a lot of traditional people.
Excellent. Has that
some of the,
sorry, has that now merged into something else? Has Fort Dodge finished, or has it transitioned into something else now?
Fort Dodge itself is finished. Now there are now independent horseback archery schools, but the festival itself is no more.
It got a little bit too much, both financially
Yeah.
as well as organization.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Korea
But
too.
surely, I'm sure it actually gave the blueprint for a lot of the you know, the horse archery competitions and stuff today. That was the original one, and people have just taken it maybe and put a new twist on it or something, right?
Yeah.
The other major festivals that emerged from Fort Dodge, although the chain of transmission, you know, they may not be able to say, that was the idea.
Yeah.
But it was 2003, Stephen Selby had organized an event in Hong Kong. And there were several people, many people from US, Asia, and other countries. Mainland China, Korea.
Yeah.
And over dinner, Jaap was seated next to Professor Kim from the Military Academy of Korea. And you guys were talking.
We were talking about doing a festival. Korea wanted to do something about a festival. Then sneakily they said, you know, to make it attractive to young people, because that's always the case. How do we bring in the next generation?
Right.
I said, why don't you put a little competition in it? Don't let the competition take over. Put a little competition there, because those boys, they want to look good for the girls. You know?
Indeed.
He was just making notes on a little napkin.
Oh yeah.
Hall and below, you know. But
2007.
We got an invitation.
2007, there was a gathering, one of the first gatherings in Korea, international gatherings, and it had lectures, talks, demonstrations, workshops, as well as a competition.
Yeah.
And it was
Amazing.
Put the ball rolling.
Then China started doing it, and
you. I have to give it to you. You guys are real troublemakers. You say one idea, and then it just turns into something else.
Just release the ball and get it rolling.
That's right. That's excellent.
Yeah,
absolutely. Let's go on to. I think we were talking about. The interview you had with the Raja of Tanjavur.
Yes, that was 1995.
Right.
And I was in India for a conference. It was a large Tamil conference in Tanjavur.
Right.
And so I had flown in. It was in maybe December. I was right in between teaching terms, so I could get away from my job. And so I'd gone to Tanjavur. And then after the conference, I was staying in Tanjavur for a couple of days. And I had met somebody from the royal family at the conference. Right. And then I headed over, like maybe a day or two after the conference, I headed over to a research library that's attached to the palace in Tanjavur. And I was talking with one of the research scholars there. And I was pestering him about, tell me about, traditions, tell me about the archery tradition. Yeah. And he said, why don't we just go and talk to the Raja? And I said, of course, let's go talk to the Raja. Of course, what an idea. So he makes a phone call, and then the Raja said, yes, please come over to the palace for have tea. So we walked over to the palace, and the Raja was, he was known as the senior member of the royal family, because at that point it was title holder. He no longer had political power, but he certainly had the legacy of having of the royal lineage. And anyway, so we sat down and we started talking. He was 89, and he was the last member of his lineage to have received traditional archery training. Wow. And so I asked him, I began thinking of every possible question I could ask. And so I started, and over the course of maybe we talked an hour or so, and I asked questions like, what kind of training did you do? And he talked about how he was given formal initiation. So he had an archery guru, an archery teacher, and the initiation was a rite where they tied a cord on his wrist from the teacher to him. So he was bound to his teacher. Right. And it was in effect a bond that was a tie that you are now going to be very serious about your training. Right. This is not just playing around. This is real. This is a moment where it was kind of consecrated. So the
Right.
training had that consecration. And so he talked about that. He described that ritual. Then he talked about the kind of training that he did. I at one point gave him, I was looking for props, and I gave him my pencil and I said, can you show me how you drew the bow? And it was a kind of a pinch grip.
Right.
And he immediately just naturally showed me. He was also emphatic that his bow was a bronze bow. And I had the research scholar was with me, and so we were working with English. But I had, please clarify. He's speaking not brass but bronze, and the Raja said bronze bow. After I wrote the article, I published it in a couple of journals, and I had many people say, no way could it be a bronze bow. So we had a friend who actually built us a bronze bow, a functional bow, to prove the point. But anyway, the Raja also talked about the kind of training where they started him close to the target, and then once he got proficient, they moved him back, and once he got better, they moved him further back, and eventually with the thumb ring. But he also said that around 1920 they stopped. And I asked what happened, and he said, we threw the bows away for tennis rackets.
Oh
and
my God.
And I asked, what happened to the bows? And he said, they're probably in a goddess temple, because there's a ritual that happens around what is August, October, fall season. And it's a ritual that is a 10-day ritual. And at the end, there's a action of shooting a bow to dispel evil.
Right.
And the bows, he said, were kept in the temple. And he said they're probably in the goddess temple. So then I tried to see if I could locate the bows, and I had no luck. no luck.
It seems very strange that they had such a long tradition of archery, master student. They took it very seriously. There was a procedure, there was a ritual, a ceremony, and then all of a sudden they give it up. Much like nowadays, people who have a sport, they start a sport, they get bored, they chuck it away, they try something new. Whereas I think generally in traditional societies, it's not a sport, it's a discipline, so it's a way of life. So
it was very much a discipline.
Yeah.
Very much.
Was there some external influence possibly from, I don't know, Western colonization or things like that?
During the colonial period.
Right.
And so it was during the period of the British Raj.
Yeah.
And the, British civil servants were all playing tennis, and you aspire, and you aspire to, what is
be like them. Yeah.
Same with China.
A trend will catch you. Same thing in China. After the Communist Revolution, archery was still a practice, but when China decided they wanted to make their name on the international sports arena, what they chose to do was train their athletes in the 1950s, train them in Olympic style. And there were maybe 3 different factors that led to the demise of traditional archery in China. Now it's being resurrected, but in the 20th century. And one was, okay, 1950s, you're going to make a splash on the international stage, you do Olympic archery. And, hornbow makers no longer had a market for their bows. Yeah. And similar in Japan, during the period of American occupation, where Sensei Shibata was making bamboo GI bows for the American GIs.
Yes, yeah. I think maybe one of the Far East cultures that maybe didn't succumb to that as much, but also is very prominent on the modern Olympic stages is Korea. In modern Olympic archery, they're running the show. Every Olympics, they're coming off with medals. World archery competitions, they're pretty much always on the podium. You can guarantee there'll be a Korean there. However, what I admire about them is that they've also maintained their long history, their culture as well of traditional archery. So
back in 2017, when we were at the festival in Yechen, we had this wonderful moment where we were seated and we were talking with a living cultural treasure, a hornbow maker.
Right.
Jaap was having a conversation, two warriors talking,
Mm.
and a woman came by and sat with us, and she was an Olympic archer. And here
Right.
was the tradition of Olympic archery in Korea and tradition, all seated at the table.
Beautiful.
It was absolutely beautiful. And she
Lovely.
was more than happy that we had our friend from Poland with us, Adam Radson, and more than happy to have coach him a little bit. It was just this wonderful, wonderful moment.
Yeah.
But in the 1920s in India, the question of what of the tradition was going to be valued. And that was a period where worldwide old practices were being edited for new practices. Now it was technology, the world was changing, lots of things that are happening. I was just glad in 1995 that I was able to catch a moment of memory from somebody who had lived both knew the past, but also very much in the present. He had lived through independence, and he lived through all of the changes in India from independence up to the 1990s. Now, the interesting thing, one little footnote about that conversation, what he described by way of the ritual, some weeks later, I was reading a Indian text, Tamil text, the Periya Puranam, and there was a discussion about an initiation ritual. So it's a 12th century text, and there was a discussion of an initiation ritual of Kanapan. And here I'm reading an account of the same kind of initiation ritual. It was quite fascinating to read. Okay, Secular is talking about, he's describing this initiation ritual, 12th century, and looking to the past, accounting for what happened. And here's 20th century, and the same form of ritual had been done. Yeah.
No, it's amazing when you know, it's like the hand of history reaches through into the future, and it creates that bridge, you know, and it still happens, and it just makes it all the more sad when we do lose our, you know, related cultures and practices. You know, we totally understand technology has to happen, development has to happen, and things like that. But you know, like the famous saying, if you don't know your past, you don't know your future.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's up to us to remember to talk with people who are old.
Yeah.
If I had the wherewithal when I was 9 and I talked to somebody who was 90, I would have a living memory that would span 150 years because they would have stretched back.
That's right.
At
Very
9,
true.
you don't think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a well-known saying in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad said, those who do not respect and hold dear the elderly and do not have mercy on the young are not of us. So, you know, they're really emphasizing, you know, you must take benefit of those who have been through life and been through the turmoil of life, the ups and downs, and seen more of life's ups and downs than yourself. And also with the young people, those are the more pure people, those people who have sinned less than you. So never look down on someone below you, and never kind of be too judgmental of someone who is much older than you, you know? So
if you look forward to the future generations, well, listening to the previous generations.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think on that note, and maybe summarize and wrap up our lovely chat here, I really feel like I've known you guys for such a long time now. I've sat with you for a couple of hours, but it seems like we've covered a couple of lifetimes. So thank you for that. In one of the lists that you gave me, we talked about passing on the torch and you know, passing on this knowledge for the future, awareness of cultural traditions and things like that. You mentioned here about the annual Chinese archery program as well that you guys were part of as well. How do you see, I don't know, the next 5-10 years? What are your plans? I'm sure you guys are not sitting still. You're always busy, you know, organizing things and developing stuff. So are people coming to you to learn the bow making or the arrow making and things like that?
Well, people always I always have people who are interested in learning bow making and arrow making. And it's difficult. It's very difficult to condense something in a few days.
Of course, of course.
But for the Chinese archery program we're hosting, because Justin and G and Duke, they're the instructors. As long as they want to proceed, we're hosting it at our place.
Okay.
You know, and we make sure that, you know, there always will be lectures, and sometimes we invite people over for a lecture and things like that. But as long as people want it, we're happy to host it.
We're very happy to create that space, and
and have people come there. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you know, yes, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, in talking about transfer of knowledge, I want to just make a little observation about what knowledge represents.
Sure.
My PhD supervisor was a man from South India, and apart from everything else I learned from him, I learned something about what knowledge is. He was the type of individual that you take your shoes off by the door
when
you start learning. It was a kind of humbleness in the light of a body of knowledge.
Yes.
Anything that you understood, you always recognized your grasp was tentative, ready to be refined as you learned more, as you cultivated greater awareness. There was a sense of knowledge that was, you had a responsibility towards that knowledge.
Yes.
Now, I also had a colleague back at the university where his understanding of knowledge was very different. It was a kind of knowledge is a weapon. Knowledge is something that you can use as power.
Yes.
You can use it to control people. And you can use it you can use it in an aggressive, assertive way. And when I think about what archery represents and how knowledge, the forms of knowledge, I think both are actually important in the world of archery. If you're in a competition, you want to be assertive.
Sure.
You want to take control.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's a sense of responsibility towards an awareness of what you're doing, an awareness of there are other traditions. If you're working within a cultural tradition, there's a demand of a sensitivity, a demand, you have to be quiet once in a while. It's time to listen. It's time to pay attention. So I think what we've done, for example, with the Chinese archery program, is we want to create a space where Justin, G, and Duke are extraordinary individuals. And what they choose to do by way of their own development of an understanding of the form of archery that they're training in, that they're teaching, that they're practicing. They didn't stop short. They kept pushing themselves. When they did the translation, and they're still pushing themselves. And then the folks who come, there's a kind of an ambiance or a culture where you don't just come in order to do what you can do. You also come because you're going to be learning from everybody, whether it's a beginner or whether it's a seasoned archer. And I think that's what we try to create with the Chinese archery program. Let's bring together, let's have an awareness of what this knowledge is. And it's knowledge which is embodied in a discipline, it's expressed in the physical practice, but it's also an orientation. It's also an intellectual posture. I don't want to use the term spiritual because that can maybe over mystify it, but there's a certain feeling that you also develop.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's very telling that, you know, the two examples you gave about knowledge, you know, we nowadays we live in the information era, information age, and there is an absolute, you know, there's overabundance of information, but that doesn't mean there's an overabundance of knowledge. And they are two different things. And we have to know what is information and what is knowledge. You know, you can have so much information, but, you know, you have to know how to process that, and what can you do with that information. And, you know, knowledge, I think, comes out of experience, you know, doing things right, doing things wrong. And I think, you know, Jaap and Kay, you guys know more than anyone. You know, you've probably made a lot more mistakes in bow making and arrow making, but that has.
I'm going to give you a secret. One secret when people say, "Oh, I want to learn bows." Okay, this is what you gotta have. You gotta have a wood stove, because you always will have kindling.
That's very true.
You will break bows.
Yeah. And
I still do.
Yeah, and but you know, in a way, we have to make those mistakes, and we have to accept and be humble, and know that you know, if the glass is full, we cannot put any more water in. So we have to kind of come with humility, empty ourselves, know that there is always someone out there who knows more than you.
Oh, sure.
There's always someone out there that can teach you something. You know, whether it be a child, an adult. You know, we can learn from many different avenues. You know, so I think what you guys are doing there, you know, not just now, but your last 20, 30 years, you've really sacrificed your life for the overall goodness of the archery community, and pushing the tradition and maintaining that has to be commended, has to be recognized. So at least from myself, for what it's worth, I'd like to thank you for the time that you've given us, the effort and sacrifices you've made, and that you're still making. You know, you guys are like a power team together. You really complement each other very well, and I can see that you are living the tradition. You're not just talking the talk. You know, we can see from your household and the life that you guys are leading, that you guys are really pushing every day, trying to learn more and spread that knowledge. So, you know, what you're doing with the Chinese program and things like that is creating that soil. You're tilling the soil. People can come and sow the seeds so that things can grow. So, you know, pretty much like the bamboo that you sowed so many years ago, it's now bearing fruit. So I'd like to really thank you for that. But in closing, is there any kind of remarks? Hopefully this will be the last chapter of this particular interview. But I think Jaap, you said we're going to maybe do a separate one about your tools and things like that.
Yeah. Practical.
There's one comment I want to make in closing.
Please.
You are an excellent moderator. It has been an absolute delight meeting you and speaking with you.
You're too kind. I really appreciate that. It's a real compliment and an honor coming from you guys. I never, if you had told me 2 weeks ago I would be talking to you guys, I wouldn't have even believed it. But you know, from my point of view, this is how God opens doors and connects people who haven't physically met, but we kind of meet in other means. So I really appreciate your guys' time, and I'm sure we're definitely going to stay in touch. And I hope whoever watches these videos, even if it's 2 or 3 people, you know, it's going to give them that inspiration. It's going to give them some benefit and some knowledge to really push them to the next level as well in their archery career. That is the hope.
And exactly. my last recommendation to anybody who's watching: go to the source.
Go to the source.
Go to the source.
100%. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
God bless you guys and keep you guys safe. And hopefully once we do get out of this Corona period and the planes start flying, I'm going to make an intention to come over and see you guys
please come
and have a cup of tea or something. So,
anyone is welcome.
Everyone is welcome. Excellent. Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. I'll speak to you very soon, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. All right. See you guys.
Bye.